Welcome to Public Speaking. Let's get started on Chapter 1, where we will go through the basics of public speaking and conversation elements, and communication apprehension. In addition, I'll have another video going through your introduction speeches and what's required for that first assignment that will be due on May 15th. So let's get going on the basics of public speaking. First of all, one of the questions that arises in most people's minds taking this class is, what is the major difference between public speaking and conversation? We all know how to make conversation. We've been doing it since we were toddlers or infants and use it daily in our lives. So therefore, we all communicate. Public speaking is different from conversation. When you are in a public speaking situation, you need to be more prepared, polished, and authoritative. People have different expectations when they sit down in front of a message that they know has been prepared professionally for them. And those expectations are that the communication event will seem a little bit different than if you were speaking to them in a face-to-face, one-on-one conversation. So let's look at some of the similarities between public speaking and conversation. In both instances, you need to organize your thoughts logically. Both audiences, whether it's in a one-on-one or a whole group of people, will expect that you are somewhat organized and logical in what you have to say. In both instances, your message should be tailored to whoever it is that you're speaking to in particular. The way that you speak to your mother or your best friend is different than the way that you would present the same message to a professor or a coworker. It's the same thing with an audience. Not all audiences are the same, even though you're presenting publicly your message. So an audience at a wedding reception is going to be a completely different audience than one in a required speaking situation such as a classroom lecture. Third, you are expected that you tell whatever your story is or whatever your message is with maximum impact in mind, not putting in any sort of filler or fluff that's not pertinent to the person that you're speaking to. That means that you have to take into account your audience in all aspects of your message. And fourth, you adapt to listener feedback. When you're speaking to somebody in a face-to-face one-on-one conversation, you make adjustments by taking turns, noticing when they look interested or bored, and create adjustments to your message based on that feedback loop. When you're speaking in public, you should be doing the same thing. Even though your awareness of the audience becomes more collective rather than individual, you should still be paying attention to what the audience is saying to you as you are giving them your message. So if you're speaking in front of a group of college students and none of them are making direct eye contact, they tend to look down and fiddle with their papers or glance at the clock, you know that what you're saying is boring them. And you should make adjustments to your presentation so that it invites them to participate more directly. Adapting to listener feedback is the key to conversational success and public speaking success. There are some differences, however. Public speaking structure requires that you take your organization up to the next level. When you give a public speech, whoever it is that's asked you to give that presentation has certain outcomes in mind. And one of the outcomes that is always present is some sort of a learning or memory retention. They would like whatever you say to have an impact to the audience and to stick. Public speaking requires a structure to put in place some of the memory retention devices that help people remember what you are saying. Second, public speaking requires a more formal language use, not only in the way that you present the words as literal words, but also in the way that your nonverbal paralanguage accents those words. So an example, a monotone sort of voice is more acceptable in a conversation. Monotone voice is not acceptable in a public speaking presentation. People expect your voice to be more dynamic. And another easy example is volume. In a face-to-face situation or conversation, you're not expected to dominate with volume. However, in public speaking situations, your volume needs to bounce off of the back wall of wherever it is that you're presenting. It should dominate the entire environment and space. Third, public speaking requires a different delivery method. So in conversations, your delivery method can change. It can adapt to the type of feedback where you switch to become a listener for a large part of the time and then back to your message. Public speaking is more formal. Not very many people are brave enough to interrupt a public speech and try to take the stage. However, they will provide feedback as they're listening to what you're saying. And as you're giving your professional public speech, you'll need to remain in control with more of an authoritative demeanor, but also in a delivery style where you are accommodating to the overall structure of that group and representing their values and the way that they communicate and hear messages best. So different delivery methods which tend to root in professionalism, but do have adjustments so that you are creating a message that your audience does want to hear and will easily listen to. Some of the basics of public speaking as far as what it will provide you and why it's a good idea to be in a class like this are that it will give you different employment opportunities. They've done studies on this and looked at all the different types of jobs that are posted and evaluated what types of skills that employers look for apart from required degrees. And the number one skill that keeps popping up on all different types of jobs is communication ability. The ability to not only write, but to speak, listen, and take charge, organize your thoughts in a way that will help other people know what they need to do and give them the skills to be successful in that. All of those are important communication abilities, and you will learn many of them in public speaking. So having confidence and being able to present your information logically and clearly will definitely help you out in your employment pursuits, regardless of what field you decide to go out in. Second, it increases your confidence. Studies on interpersonal relationships have found that confidence is attractive for all different types of relationships. We are attracted to confident people. Just by being able to speak and hold yourself non-verbally in a confident manner will transfer into an increased confidence that you have, which should produce better, more satisfying relationships. Third, your educational and personal successes. You will have to give public speeches in multiple different situations throughout your college career. Being familiar with how to structure speeches in a way that conveys your message should transfer into better grades and help you in your assignments so that they're not as daunting. And finally, civic engagement. Being able to involve yourself in the community and help in different ways usually requires face-to-face involvement. So being able to logically form your ideas and put them in a way that other people will accept and maybe even follow is good for civic engagement. So let's go through the speech communication process. The communication process that I'll be going over is a transactional model of communication. It's something that you'll see in all of your basic communication classes as you go through your undergraduate, and is the basis for how we communicate in not only public speaking situations but also interpersonal. So here's the different elements included in the speech communication process. You have a speaker who is telling something, a message of sorts, to a listener. There's a feedback loop that's happening simultaneously between the speaker and the listener. There's a channel with how you decided to deliver that content, an environment or a situation that's affecting the way that it's perceived, and then noise. There's 3 different types of noise that will be interrupting your message. There's physical noise, psychological noise, and external noise. So let's put these terms into effect by looking at the following diagram. You can see in this picture that there's a girl and a boy, and not really clear who's speaking and who's listening. In the transactional models of communication, both speaker and listener would be embodied by both people. So even though you are speaking a particular part of the message, you also take your turn listening and responding to the nonverbal feedback that you get from the other person, and it goes back and forth. In public speaking situations, even though you don't have people who are taking turns in the conversation, they are still providing nonverbal communication back to you. They're speaking to you as you're speaking to them. So you have speakers and listeners on both sides. You have a message that's being conveyed, and that message is being conveyed from the speaker and from the listener through the form of feedback. As you're speaking, you can provide feedback to your audience, and as you're listening, you can do that as well through your nonverbal communication and also through verbal. You have a channel, which is where your message is being expressed. So if you are giving a speech in front of an audience in an auditorium, that particular channel would have different sorts of requirements than if you were giving a speech in front of a classroom situation. For this class, you're going to be uploading your videos and submitting them on a file, which is going to delay the feedback loop because of the channel. However, it's still a communication event, even though the channel may provide either immediate or delayed feedback. And then you have interference, which is the noise, and the situation, which is on the outside. Let's start with the situation first. The situation or environment in which you are speaking does play a large part in how the message is sent and received. So, an example, if you were to walk into an environment or a situation where the audience had paid a lot of money to come and listen to you present, there are going to be certain expectations for the speaker and for the listener in that environment. So imagine if you were to go to a comedy club and listen to a comedian versus you are going to a class because you know your professor is going to dock your grade if you don't show up. That does affect the message, the way that it's perceived from the audience, and the way that it's spoken. In situations where people have paid a lot of money, entertainment goes way up, because of the expectation that they get something for what they've put into it. In situations where it's more mandatory, entertainment can go down. So a required training doesn't have to have the same types of entertainment as a speaking engagement where you've paid money to listen and watch what's being performed. And then you have your interference or your noise. And like I mentioned, there's 3 different types of noise. There's physical noise, psychological noise, and external noise. Let's start with the physical noise first. If as an audience member or even in an interpersonal communication event, you are hungry or you are tired, you will process the message differently than if you're well rested or well fed. The same goes if you're presenting your message. As a speaker, if you are tired and go up to give your presentation, your energy levels will be down and the way that your message comes across to your audience will change. Other types of physical noise can be things that go on within your own body. So like we'll talk about communication apprehension, and if you have a high level of communication apprehension, you might have a lot of adrenaline pumping through your body, which may make you sick to your stomach. That's going to really affect the way that you present your speech to your audience. Same thing if you're in an interpersonal situation and you're very attracted to the person that you're talking to. It might make your head feel light, for example, which becomes a physical noise, which will cloud the message. The second is the psychological noise. So whatever's going on in your head will play into how you listen to or reject a message. So let's say that you're mad at your mother, for example, and she comes in to talk to you. Because of that psychological noise of the anger or resentment, regardless of what she has to say, it's going to be harder for you to listen to her message. You'll have all sorts of other thoughts going on in your mind. Depression is another really good example of psychological noise and how messages can get blocked because of information that's going on in somebody's head. The last part is external noise. Walking into a room that's really warm is a form of external noise. It will make you tired because the physical environment has so much heat. If you were to walk down the street and smell a skunk, it doesn't really matter what you are saying or what's going on in the conversation. That noise will be so loud that you'll have a hard time hearing whatever the message was going to be about. So paying attention to the external things that are going on around you can help make sure that your communication event is better. Now let's talk about communication apprehension. First of all, it's important to know that everybody gets nervous in public speaking situations. It's the number one fear for a lot of people for good reason. Generally, what it feels like is you get a flood of adrenaline going through your body, which makes your hands shake, makes you sweat, and your stomach feel anxious and kind of sick, as if it's doing somersaults. And that's pretty consistent for most people because that's the way that adrenaline affects us. Your head may pound, your heart might beat faster. Those are other common signs of nervousness. And it's important to know that everybody has this. So even the most experienced speakers will have a flood of adrenaline before they go on the stage. And it can be beneficial. That adrenaline can give you the energy that you need to convey your message in a clear and direct way that creates interest and excitement. So it's good. So what you can do about it is learn to channel those nerves positively. And here's some things to do to have that happen. You can acquire more speaking experience. That can help. Just being in this public speaking class will help you through exposure to get more comfortable speaking to others. You can prepare. For people who are high in communication apprehension, it may take more preparation for them than someone else who is lower on the communication apprehension scale. That's just the way that it goes with kind of our natural talents and innate abilities. I've tried to keep things as fair and balanced as I can in this class, requiring at least the same basic amount of work for each presentation, regardless of your skill set. But at the end of the day, if you're higher in communication apprehension, you may need to prepare a little bit more than someone else. Go through your speech 5 or 6 times instead of 2 or 3 times before you give it. You might need to think positively, and the way that you ruminate over situations and expectations with that does have an outcome. There's something called self-fulfilling prophecy, where what you do and think does transfer into the way that you act and behave. You can use the power of visualization to put yourself in a more positive situation in your mind, knowing that that self-fulfilling prophecy should transfer into a better performance down the road. You should know that most nervousness is not visible. Most people don't see it, and although you're feeling like you might pass out or throw up, no one else can see that internal struggle. Even handshaking is usually not something that people pick up on. We do tend to have nervous adapters, and I'll help you know what your particular nervous adapter is so you can be aware of it, but most nervousness is not visible. And finally, don't expect perfection. What you should expect is progress. No one is perfect. Everyone in this class is expected to improve regardless of what your innate ability is with public speaking. And it's not that I'm striving that everyone becomes perfect. I'm just striving that everyone will be able to progress in the same amount regardless of where they are with their innate ability. So there's a checklist on page 15, and this might help you know how much nerves could play a part in your speaking for this semester. So you might want to check that out as well, and just be aware that if you're higher on the communication apprehension scale and you know this is something that affects you interpersonally as well as in public situations, you might need to be more proactive in those instances. And I do have some other ideas and training to help combat communication apprehension. Google is also a really good place to go. Learn more about it. So I've asked you to take a communication apprehension quiz. That's your second assignment. That was due this first week. Your communication apprehension is your fear associated by real or anticipated communication with another person or persons. So that scale had questions referring to public speaking and referring to interpersonal interactions. And it's been found that those people who are high in communication apprehension will have these nerves peak up in both instances. Learning how to combat it and training yourself so that it doesn't become something that's debilitative is really the key with communication apprehension. And I encourage you to take that quiz pretty seriously, and then be willing to do the extra work if you are high on communication apprehension so that you can put this behind you for once and for all. There's his name is Jim McCroskey, who is another good person to Google on this topic. He's the leading researcher for communication apprehension, and he has done numerous studies where he's looked at what causes communication apprehension and the best ways to treat it. So there actually is a lot of information out there about it. It's just something that you need to be aware of. And I won't be able to take too much time in this class, so you'll have to do some of the initial research on your own. So, reducing communication apprehension. Let's talk about some of the things that the book brings up that you can do. The first is a systematic desensitization. Just by giving speeches, it's going to make it easier. If you are nervous talking to people in conversations or starting a conversation, just by having a goal that you will start 3 new conversations a day will make it easier by the end of the week to initiate conversations. So it's a behavioral training technique rooted in psychology, actually, where you just retrain your behavior, which then affects your mind. And it does work. Another way is through cognitive modification. By directly challenging the things that you are saying to yourself in your mind, you can modify the end result and your behavior and expectations. So the way that you do cognitive modification training is to write down the negative thoughts that you're having about, let's put it in a public speaking situation first. So giving your first speech, you could say that you're nervous that I'm not going to like your message, that you're going to forget, that you're going to look stupid, or whatever your nerves are. You write those things down, and then right out to the side of them, combat it with the other side of the spectrum. So you're nervous that I'm not going to like your material. You write out to the other side, of course she's going to like my material because it's about me and I'm interesting. And you directly combat that negative thought. Or what if I forget everything that I was going to say? You combat that on the other side. I have prepared my full content outline. I have good speaking notes. I've done the work and I know that I can do a good job. Now you'll notice with cognitive modification, you can't lie to yourself. So if you really didn't do the work, you can't write out to the side, yes, I did the work, and expect to have that have a positive effect. Your brain knows the truth. So that's the only kicker with this one, is that you actually do have to do those things to have it make an effect. You can do the same thing in your interpersonal life. If you're nervous going up and talking to somebody, write out your fears and then combat them on the other side of the spectrum with what possibly could happen. And you'll see that just by having that sort of visualization, it does tend to produce better results. And it actually goes into the systematic desensitization that we talked about before. You can get assertiveness training, and this class is a form of assertiveness training because it tackles public speaking, but there are other types of programs as well. There's seminars that you can sign up for, even getting jobs that require sales or people sort of experiences will help you combat your communication apprehension. And by putting yourself in an environment where you have to do it, you will do it, and it'll become a skill set for you. Some other ideas for reducing communication apprehension in regards to public speaking is, first, to believe in your topic. Choose information that you want to present, that you know you're passionate about, that you'll want to spend a lot of time researching and looking into. Next, view the speech-making process positively, not negatively. Ruminating about how hard this is or how nervous you are isn't going to help you. What you need to do is break it down into sizable chunks and tell yourself that you can do it. If you'll do that, then you will be able to succeed. Visualize your success and do whatever sort of meditation practices or calming practices that you need so that you put yourself in a positive position and you can see yourself doing well. Project confidence, especially non-verbally. And the 3 areas to pay attention to with this is in your posture, in your eye contact, and in your voice. And I'll talk about those 3 things when we get to delivery in particular. And then finally, test your messages out. Practice your delivery. Don't just give it to yourself in front of the mirror. Actually sit down and give your speech to a live person and monitor their reactions. Make adjustments to your presentation based on that feedback. Practice as much as you need to so that you know you can use that cognitive modification and challenge those feelings of nerves with something literal. You did put in a ton of work onto this speech. You know that you can pull it off. That's important to be able to tell yourself honestly. And then finally, you should be able to gain perspective after your speech. So what will be required in this class is that you do self-evaluations for most all of your presentations that you give. You need to ask yourself what worked well and what you think you could do better next time. The idea is that you're committed to improvement, not to perfection. And I'll give you some assignments where you can go through and make some particular evaluations. But you should also, even during your practice sessions, you gain perspective, figure out what you've done well, what you still need to work on, and focus on that. Focus on it being something that you're improving with, not that you expected that you'd be perfect with the first time. Your first speech, which will be your introduction speech, due on May 15th. There are a couple of specifics to keep in mind with this presentation. The first is what the overall topic needs to relate to. What I'd like you to do is to choose an object that represents who you are or who you would like to be. This can be any object that you'd like, but you will need to show it somehow in the presentation. So that could be through a picture or through the actual object. So for example, I could choose to relate myself to my iPhone because it's something that I have with me a lot. After you've chosen your object, you need to think about how this object represents you and try to come up with at least two main reasons. So if I want to relate myself to my iPhone, I could say that it's because I like to store a lot of information and I like to be accessible, and then use those as my two main points. Then you need to start dividing your speech into three different areas: your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. Throughout the semester, you're going to learn a lot of particular techniques for developing proper introductions, bodies, and conclusions, which are each segmented into those different parts. And they change depending on the type of speech that you're giving. So this will really just be your first shot at understanding the difference between an introduction, body, and conclusion, similar to how you would write an English essay. You should develop a full content or manuscript outline for your speech. This is something you'll have to submit separate from the presentation, and it needs to be a word-for-word planning for what you would like to say in your speech, something that you will then develop your speaking outline from. You can have up to 3 3x5 cards where you write your speaking outline in which you will use while you're presenting. This should be something that's much shorter than your manuscript. The idea is not to take the manuscript and write really small on the cards. The idea is to prepare a manuscript and then create speaking notes to help trigger your mind back to that preparation. Then you need to start organizing your speech, or, those are the specifics. But as soon as you have your topic, you know what your main areas are going to be, you should start organizing your speech. In the introduction, what I will be looking for is that you implement an attention getter that tells the audience where you're going with your speech and includes a clear thesis statement that tells the audience the main points that you're planning on addressing. The other element from your rubric for this particular speech is that you somehow introduce your object to the audience during your introduction. Then you'll have the body portion of your speech, which needs to have at least 2 to 3 main points. And the key for the body is that it needs to include transitions. So I'd like to have a transition statement such as first or next or now, something like that before each of your main points, so that the audience knows that they should be breaking and refocusing on something else. When you write out an English paper, you get to create paragraph indents, which have a natural breaking point. When you're speaking, we don't know where those paragraph indents would be. You have to create them through words such as next or now, and also through pauses. Just by creating a break in the way that you're speaking, your audience will know that they should refocus and prepare themselves to connect to different information. Third, your conclusion. You need to let the audience know that you're going to finish and have some sort of signal to close. This signal to close is a statement as easy as "in conclusion." It could also be "as we've seen" or "today I've discussed." Any of those phrases work well as a signal to your audience that you're about done with your presentation. When you're writing, your conclusion is automatically signaled because the person reading your document can see that there's only a small paragraph left. When you're speaking, you have to create that visualization yourself, and that's what a signal to close will do. The second part is to reinforce your thesis statement. You need to reiterate what the main points of your presentation were in some sort of a summary. And then finally, I'd like you to end your speech with a bang, something that's memorable for the audience. You cannot end your speeches with thank you in my class. Instead, I'd like you to think of something a bit more memorable to end with. Quotes are a good idea, statements, really anything can work as long as non-verbally you have your voice drop down slowly from here to here to here. And by creating a slow drop with pauses like that, your audience will innately know that that's the end of your speech. It doesn't really matter what you have to say. You could have the best quote in the world to end with, and if you end on an uptick with your voice, they won't know that you're done. It's through the nonverbal signaling that they can figure out that your speech is about to be over. So an example of this could be an Edward Abbey quote. If I wanted to end my speech with, Edward Abbey said it best, by love flowers best in openness and freedom, you would know that that was the end of my speech. If I was to say that same quote, Edward Abbey states, love flowers best in openness and freedom, there's no way you would know that that was the end. So practice that statement a couple of times. And then remember to use the example speeches that I've posted on Canvas and in your book as a template. They do a good job of showing all the elements that you need and can give you an idea of what the manuscript should look like. Then you need to go into rehearsing your speech. Make sure that you go through it out loud quite a few times. See yourself in a mirror, and then as I just explained, you also need to present this in front of other people. Ask your friends or family to give you some feedback and tell you what you're doing verbally or non-verbally, especially in regards to confidence that you might be displaying. Time your speech and make sure that it will be between 2 and 5 minutes. As I explained, you will be docked on your score 5 points per minute off of this guideline. Compare your speech to the grading rubric that I've listed on Canvas and make any adjustments that you need to based off of that. You really should know what you get on your grade as soon as you submit your assignment. It'll be the same evaluation that I will put into it. And then record your speech and upload it. Make sure that you've gone through and tested to see that your computer device and technology are compatible with Canvas. I've put up a test assignment. You can have 5 extra credit points if you will complete that before this first speech, just to make sure that everything worked. YouTube links as well are something that you might want to practice with. So be sure to double check with that and then submit your full content outline on a separate assignment tab for me to read. So let me know if you have any questions.